I thought my business was in reliable hands. My partner and best friend convinced me we were working toward a common goal. And then he sold the company without my knowledge and tried to leave me without a penny. But he didn't know that I always keep an ace up my sleeve. I still remember the day Thomas and I shook hands over cheap coffee in that rundown office space in downtown Chicago. The walls needed fresh paint, the windows rattled when trucks passed by, and the ceiling had water stains in 3 different corners. But it was ours, the birthplace of what would become Vertex Solutions. "We're going to make this work," Thomas said, his eyes gleaming with that charismatic confidence that had drawn me to partner with him in the first place. My management skills, your money and technical genius, were the perfect match, Michael. I believed him. I had the inheritance from my father's life insurance and a decade of experience in software development. Thomas had an MBA from Northwestern and a network of connections that spanned from Chicago to San Francisco. On paper, we complemented each other perfectly. The first 2 years were brutal. I coded until my fingers cramped, often sleeping under my desk when deadlines loomed. Meanwhile, Thomas worked his magic in boardrooms and at networking events, gradually building our client list. I didn't mind that he became the face of Vertex. I preferred working behind the scenes, focusing on product development while he handled the presentations and contract negotiations. "You're the brains, I'm the mouth," he'd joke during our Friday evening beers. That's why we work. By year 3, we had 20 employees and a proper office in the West Loop with a view of the Chicago skyline. Our security software had caught the attention of major financial institutions, and we were finally turning a consistent profit. When we celebrated our 5th anniversary, we had 68 employees and had just opened a satellite office in Austin. "We did it, Mike," Thomas said, clinking his champagne glass against mine at our company celebration. 5 years ago, we had nothing but an idea. Look at us now. The room was filled with our employees, all raising their glasses. I felt a surge of pride watching Thomas give his speech. He thanked me profusely, calling me the wizard behind the curtain, the technical genius who made it all possible. I never doubted his sincerity. Not even when Jessica, our head of HR, pulled me aside at the Christmas party that year. "Michael, I don't want to overstep, but have you noticed anything off about Thomas lately?" she asked, her voice low despite the loud holiday music. "What do you mean?" "He's been having a lot of meetings that aren't on the shared calendar. And last week, I accidentally received an email that was supposed to go to him. It mentioned something about valuation reports." I laughed it off. "We're constantly evaluating acquisition targets." "That's probably what it was." She nodded, unconvinced. "Maybe. Just, keep your eyes open, okay?" I should have listened to her. Instead, I doubled down on our expansion plans, focusing on developing our next-generation platform while Thomas handled the business operations almost entirely on his own. I trusted him completely. After all, we had built this company from nothing, together. The following spring, Thomas suggested restructuring our corporate bylaws. "It's just to streamline decision-making," he explained while sliding the documents across my desk. "As we grow, we need to be able to move faster. Sometimes waiting for both of us to sign off on everything slows us down." I skimmed the dense legal text, noting that it would give Thomas unilateral authority on certain business operations. But there was a clause that gave me final say on all product development decisions, which was what I cared about most. "Looks reasonable," I said, signing where indicated. "As long as nobody messes with my code." Thomas laughed. "Wouldn't dream of it, partner." What I didn't tell him was that I had my own insurance policy. 3 years earlier, after a falling out with a minor investor who tried to claim rights to our proprietary algorithms, I had quietly registered all our intellectual property, branding, and trademarks under a separate holding company that only I controlled. It was a defensive move, meant to protect us from outside threats. I never imagined I'd need protection from within. The warning signs continued to pile up. Thomas began excluding me from meetings with our biggest clients. He hired a CFO without consulting me, a sharp-eyed woman named Vanessa who treated me with professional courtesy but clear distance. Our once-weekly partner lunches dwindled to monthly, then quarterly catch-ups. "We're just so busy growing," Thomas would say when I mentioned the distance between us. "Success comes with sacrifice, right?" Then came the renovations. Without warning, my office was relocated to the other side of the building while Thomas's was expanded to include a private conference room and lounge area. "It's for client meetings," he explained. "We need to project success." I let it go. Looking back, I can't believe how blind I was, how willing to accept each small betrayal because I couldn't imagine the magnitude of what was coming. It was a Tuesday morning in October when the email arrived. "Dear Mr. Reeves, we are pleased to confirm the successful completion of the acquisition of Vertex Solutions by XYZ Group. Congratulations on this significant achievement." I stared at my screen, convinced it was some kind of phishing attempt. I forwarded it to our IT security team with a note about potential scams. Then my phone rang. It was Vanessa, the CFO. "Michael, do you have a moment to come to the conference room?" Her voice was unnaturally formal. When I arrived, Thomas was sitting at the head of the table, flanked by 3 people in expensive suits I'd never seen before. Vanessa sat to the side, not meeting my eyes. "What's going on?" I asked, still clutching my phone. "I just got a strange email about an acquisition." Thomas stood up, extending his hand to me. "Michael, I'd like you to meet the executive team from XYZ Group. They're our new corporate parents." The room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "What are you talking about?" "We haven't been exploring any acquisition offers." "I've been handling those discussions," Thomas said smoothly. "As per our updated corporate structure, which you signed off on last spring." One of the suits, a silver-haired man with cold eyes, slid a folder toward me. "The deal closed yesterday. $8 million. Quite the success story for a company your size." $8 million. For a company that had been valued at $12 million just last year, and was projecting $20 million in revenue this year alone. "This is a joke, right?" I looked from face to face, waiting for someone to break character. Nobody did. "Thomas, a word. In private." I managed to keep my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. He smiled apologetically at the executives. "Would you excuse us for a few minutes?" Once we were alone in his office, I exploded. "What the hell are you doing? You sold our company. Without even telling me." "I was going to tell you," he said, dropping the pleasant facade. "But the timing was delicate. XYZ wanted this done quickly and quietly." "And the money?" $8 million is insultingly low." Thomas shrugged. "It was the best offer on the table." "Where's my share?" I demanded. "Well, that's a bit complicated." He sat down behind his desk, putting a barrier between us. "According to our corporate structure, the proceeds go to majority voting shareholders. Which, after the restructuring, is me." The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that for a moment I couldn't speak. 7 years of partnership, of friendship, of building something together, and this was how it ended. "You've been planning this for over a year," I finally said. "The restructuring, the separate meetings, the new CFO, it was all leading to this." He didn't deny it. "Business is business, Michael. You focused on the technology, I focused on maximizing our exit opportunity. By stealing my company from under me?" I was shouting now, past caring who might hear. "Our company," he corrected. "And legally, I've done nothing wrong. You signed the documents." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think clearly through the haze of anger. "You're right. I did sign those documents." Thomas relaxed slightly, probably thinking I was accepting defeat. "But I have one question," I continued. Did you or your fancy lawyers check all the intellectual property registrations before you made this deal? A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Of course we did. Everything's included in the sale. I smiled for the first time since entering the building that morning. Are you absolutely sure about that? What are you talking about? Call your new bosses, I said, walking toward the door. Tell them to check who actually owns the Vertex brand, logo, code base, and client integration protocols. I'll wait. The look of confusion on his face was worth every sleepless night I was about to endure. I left his office and walked straight to the elevator, ignoring the stares of employees who had clearly heard our argument. Outside on the street, I called Jessica, who had left the company 6 months earlier after clashing with Thomas. You were right, I told her. About everything. I'm so sorry, Michael. What are you going to do? I'm going to fight back, I said, watching the Chicago skyline gleam in the autumn sunlight. And I'm going to need a good HR director for my new company. The next 48 hours were a blur of legal meetings and strategic planning. I contacted Daniel Werner, a ruthless corporate attorney who specialized in intellectual property disputes. I explained my situation. Years ago, I had created a separate holding company, CodeVault LLC, that owned all the intellectual property, trademarks, and branding of Vertex solutions. Thomas had sold the company, but not the rights to use its own name or technology. This is either brilliant foresight or extremely lucky paranoia, Daniel said after reviewing my documentation. Either way, you're in a strong position. While Thomas was celebrating with his new corporate overlords, I was preparing the legal equivalent of a nuclear strike. On Friday morning, 3 days after the sale was announced, XYZ Group received a cease and desist letter demanding they stop using the Vertex name, logo, and proprietary code, all of which were the legal property of CodeVault LLC. Thomas called me within the hour, his voice tight with fury. What the hell do you think you're doing? Business is business, I replied, throwing his words back at him. You focused on selling the company, I focused on protecting its most valuable assets. This won't stand up in court. Maybe not. But are XYZ willing to find out? They just paid $8 million for a company that can't legally use its own name or technology. How do you think they're feeling about your due diligence right now? He hung up without another word. The following week was corporate warfare at its most brutal. XYZ Group immediately halted the integration process and brought in their own legal team. They discovered what I already knew: the acquisition was essentially worthless without the intellectual property. They had bought an empty shell. Thomas tried desperately to salvage the situation, offering to buy back the IP rights from me. I declined. He threatened to sue. I welcomed the challenge. He appealed to our history, our friendship. I reminded him that he had destroyed that himself. 10 days after the acquisition was announced, XYZ Group rescinded the deal, citing material misrepresentation of assets. They demanded their money back and filed suit against Thomas personally for fraud. Meanwhile, I was busy building from the ashes. I incorporated a new company, Apex Innovations, using the same intellectual property assets. I contacted our former clients, many of whom were confused and concerned about the abrupt acquisition and subsequent legal battle. I explained what had happened, not the personal betrayal, but the business facts. Most were relieved to hear that the technology they relied on would continue to be supported. I rehired key employees who had been unsettled by Thomas's leadership and the chaotic acquisition. Jessica returned as head of HR with an ownership stake. Our lead developers, who had been planning to quit after the acquisition, came back with renewed enthusiasm. 3 months later, Apex Innovations had recaptured 60% of Vertex's former clients and was growing steadily. Thomas, on the other hand, was facing multiple lawsuits and had become toxic in the Chicago business community. The last I heard, he had moved to Florida and was trying to rebuild his reputation in a new market. Sometimes I wonder if I should have seen it coming, if there were red flags I ignored because I trusted our friendship. Other times, I wonder if my revenge was too complete, too devastating. Thomas lost everything, his money, his reputation, his future in the industry we both loved. But then I remember the look on his face in that conference room, the casual way he planned to discard me after 7 years of building something together. I remember how he was willing to sell our vision, our creation, at a discount price just to cut me out. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Mine was served with a side of poetic justice. Last week, I received an email from a former client who had briefly moved to XYZ during the acquisition chaos. They're coming back to Apex now. In the meeting to finalize their return, their CTO leaned across the table and said, "We should have stuck with you from the beginning. Nobody builds security solutions like you do." I smiled and thanked him for his confidence. It wasn't about the revenge anymore. It was about the vindication, the proof that what Thomas had tried to steal wasn't just a company, but a vision and an expertise that couldn't be bought or sold without the heart and mind behind it. That night, I stayed late at our new offices, looking out at the same Chicago skyline. We're smaller now than Vertex was at its peak, but we're growing again, building something real and lasting. Something that can't be sold out from under me. Sometimes, I still find myself reaching for my phone to share good news with Thomas, forgetting for a moment everything that happened. Old habits die hard. But then I remember, and the impulse passes. In business, as in life, you have to protect what matters most. Sometimes that means keeping an ace up your sleeve, not because you want to play it, but because you might have to.